The gutters in Chicago had been cleaned by Wes Barnes for 39 years. He knew every street and every roof. He knew every secret that had come tumbling down the gutters in the past 3 decades. Raindrops and leaves and stray animal feathers littered his world, but Wes was always there to do his job. He even kept a detailed diary of everything that fell. It was his late wife Patricia who taught him to do so. "Write it down, Wes," she said one day. "One day, what falls in the gutters will change your life." At 63, Wes climbed up the wooden ladder on his knees. He always worked alone. He rarely complained. He saw rich men rise and fall, but the old brick houses on Maple Street held a special place in his heart. He always felt that he was doing his job well when he cleaned up his own home. Everything changed the day Montgomery Sterling bought the houses from his son. The billionaire wanted to do away with the old buildings and replace them with luxury condos. He did not care that about the 60 families who were going to lose their homes. Montgomery didn't even seem to care that Wes had been faithfully cleaning those gutters for almost 4 decades. In Wes's opinion, Montgomery was not different from the other greedy developers that the city was plagued with. Wes heard the sad news from Mrs. Delgado, a grizzled old woman who had lived on Maple Street since 1985. She was crying on her porch when Wes came by to ask if he could help. "He's evicting us, Wes. All of us." She looked up at him with tear-streaked cheeks. Wes said nothing. He just gave her a sympathetic stare. He had fought bullies before, but never someone like Montgomery. The billionaire had influence, money, and lawyers. Wes had his diary. Back at his small home, Wes flipped the pages of his old leather-bound book. Patricia's flowing script filled the pages. "Write everything down, my love. Truth will always find the light." He began writing about Montgomery. He wrote about Mrs. Delgado. He wrote about the billboards that announced the arrival of the bulldozers. Wes suddenly remembered the torn check he had found 15 years ago. He had saved the torn pieces in an envelope, but he couldn't seem to remember what it was that he had found. He stared at the envelope with new eyes. Perhaps it was time to find out. It was a cloudy morning when Wes parked his old truck on Maple Street. As usual, he got out a ladder and prepared to climb. Only it wasn't a normal day. Montgomery had arrived. The billionaire was dressed in a designer suit and was standing in front of the old condemned houses, smiling for the cameras. He wanted to put on a show for the paparazzi. Wes was on the ladder, cleaning the old Delgado house's gutters. He had promised Mrs. Delgado that he would fix the drainage, but Montgomery seemed to want to finish quickly. The billionaire came up to him with a sneer on his face as Wes tied off a knot. The cameras followed his every step. "This is incredible," Montgomery said loudly. "This man crawls inside filth while I rise to great heights. This man is drainage. This man belongs in the gutters, not in my neighborhood." The crowd of neighbors watched with anxious expressions. Montgomery grabbed a pail of dirty water from Wes's truck and dumped it over his head. The foul-smelling liquid cascaded down Wes's back as Montgomery laughed. "This is where you belong. In the gutters. I am making something great. People like you will only tarnish it." The cameras captured every reaction. Wes stood on the ladder, unmoving. Montgomery looked surprised when Wes didn't react right away. He finally took a step forward. "You're crawling in filth, man," Montgomery said. "You belong to the gutter. I'm making something great. People like you will only tarnish it." The crowd gasped, but Wes continued to stand on the ladder. "This man is drainage. This man belongs in the gutters, Not in my neighborhood. Wes stepped off the ladder to glare at Montgomery. You don't know the things I've seen in the gutters, Wes said quietly. Montgomery laughed. What could a man like you possibly see in the gutters? Nothing. He turned to the throng of cameras. This man is pathetic. He spends 40 years crawling in filth, and he doesn't realize he's nothing. He's absolutely nothing. The crowd let out startled gasps. Several people began to cry. Wes descended the ladder and wandered over to his truck. Montgomery watched him with disgust as he opened the glove compartment. Wes's hands shook as he pulled out a yellow envelope. He held it against his chest, as if protecting it from Montgomery. Pathetic, Montgomery muttered. Go home, old man. Wash that filth away. And stay the hell away from my property. He turned to walk back to his waiting reporters, but stopped when Wes stepped in front of him. Wes opened the envelope. Wes smiled to himself as he stared at the yellowed check. He had saved it for a reason, but it seems Patricia had been right about something else. I think I know why I saved it, Wes whispered to the wind. He looked up and seemed to be looking right at Patricia. Wes walked into the Chicago FBI field office later that afternoon. He was greeted by a receptionist whose name tag read Special Agent Miller. He was an attractive woman with tired eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Wes stepped behind the heavy security doors and told her his business. I need to speak to someone about some information I have, Wes said. FBI Field Office, Chicago. The young agent at the front desk tried to motion him away. Sir, you need to make an appointment to speak with someone. We're very busy. Wes pulled out the envelope. I found this 15 years ago. The agent's eyes widened as he saw what Wes held. This is incredible. He hurriedly ushered Wes inside. I'm going to get Miller, sir. She's the one you need to speak with. Miller was the first to respond when Wes arrived at his desk. She was an attractive woman with tired eyes. You must be Wes Barnes, she said when she saw him. Let's hear it then, Mr. Barnes. Wes opened the envelope. Miller's lips parted in shock when she saw what he revealed. Where did you find this? Wes showed her the check. I think it belonged to your father. His name was Harold Sterling, right? Miller's fingers trembled as she carefully examined the yellowed check. This is incredible, she whispered. This is the very check we've been looking for. She looked up at Wes. Do you know what this means? Wes shrugged. This check belongs to Montgomery's father, he said. Didn't he do something illegal with his company? Miller's eyes grew wide. Yes. Montgomery inherited everything from his father, including his business. We believe Harold was robbing his own company for years. Miller spent the next few hours putting all the pieces together. Wes's discovery fit perfectly with everything they already knew. It seemed the check never actually left Harold's possession. Montgomery had been using the money for years before he finally built his own empire. The check was proof that Harold Sterling had been embezzling company funds. I think I know why I saved it, Wes whispered to the wind. The records are all there. Wes, what you found is incredible. Miller looked up at him with shining eyes. That man has been stealing for 30 years. It's over now. Wes looked out the window, watching the busy street. My wife always said truth had a way of finding the light, he said quietly. I guess I was just holding onto the flashlight the whole time. The next morning, Agent Miller returned to the old Delgado house. She had stayed there the whole night, searching through Wes's diary and flipping through old documents. Miller was a competent agent, but Wes had been right to call in the FBI. The man was a master manipulator, and his criminal activities were far more complicated than anyone had been able to prove. "Mr. Barnes," Miller said when Wes answered the door, "we've arrested Montgomery. We believe he will be indicted for fraud, bribery, and theft of public records." Wes looked up at the sky. He was silent for a moment. "So you'll need me to testify." Miller studied Wes's face. She could tell he was still hurting, but she also knew he needed to do this. "It will help if you're there when we serve the documents." Wes looked up at the sky. He thought of Mrs. Delgado. He thought of Patricia. He thought of the many years he had spent cleaning the gutters of people who didn't deserve them. "Yes," he said finally. "I want to see his face." The federal agents arrived outside the corner office at 9:00 a.m. Montgomery was on the 45th floor preparing to sign some more eviction papers for the Maple Street families. He was smiling to himself, imagining the luxury condos, when Agent Miller knocked on the door. Montgomery was surprised to see the federal agent standing in his front office. "What is this all about?" He looked up from the papers he had been reading. "Montgomery Sterling, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and theft," Miller said. Montgomery's smile disappeared. "This is ridiculous. My father's case was never proven guilty. There was never any evidence." Miller pulled the check out of the file. "This is the missing evidence in your father's case. In fact, this check proves that Harold Sterling stole over $3 million from his own company." Montgomery's face contorted in rage. "This is absurd. My father's case was never proven guilty. There was never any evidence." His bodyguards tried to stop her, but Miller continued. "Mr. Sterling, you've been laundering money for 30 years. You've been stealing from countless companies in order to fund your lavish lifestyle." Montgomery's eyes widened. "There is no evidence of any of this." He turned to his bodyguards. "Call my lawyers." They moved to stop Miller, but stopped when Wes appeared in the doorway. Montgomery's hands trembled as he stared at his old nemesis. "Is this a joke?" Montgomery growled. "What is this all about?" Miller led him to the table. "Your father stole $3 million from his company. You've been laundering and stealing money for 30 years. Montgomery looked up at Wes in disbelief. "You always were a lowly gutter man. How dare you accuse me?" Wes crossed his arms over his chest. "I am a gutter man," Wes said quietly. "And I've seen far more than you know." Montgomery's bodyguards looked nervous. They seemed to realize that this wasn't over. "Get off my property, gutter man," Montgomery spat. Wes turned to leave. "I'm going to miss you, Montgomery. You always were one of my favorite customers." Montgomery looked surprised when Wes stepped outside. He followed him and stopped when Wes turned to face him. "You always were one of my favorite customers." "You're going to regret this, gutter man," Montgomery said. Wes looked at him with quiet eyes. "I don't think so." The next day, Montgomery was dragged out of the building in handcuffs. He was still cursing when Wes appeared behind him. Montgomery turned to glare at him when he saw the old man. "What now, gutter man?" Montgomery demanded. Wes turned to face him, smiling softly. "I think it's time for me to go." Montgomery looked puzzled. "Go? Go where?" Wes gestured toward the waiting black sedans. "That's your ride, sir." Montgomery looked surprised when he took in the uniforms of the men waiting for him. "What is this?" He turned to face Wes. "You think you can drag me away in front of all these people?" Montgomery's bodyguards tried to stop the federal agents, but Miller was waiting for him. "You have the right to remain silent." Montgomery looked stunned. "What the hell is this?" Miller looked at Wes. "It's time to go, Mr. Sterling." Montgomery's stomach twisted. "What does that mean? Where are you taking me?" Miller looked up at Wes. "I believe it's time for Mr. Sterling to testify at trial." Montgomery looked around the room. "This is ridiculous. You have no proof." Across the street, Mrs. Delgado and the other neighbors watched with stunned expressions. Wes looked at the old woman. It seems Montgomery was stealing money from his own company for 30 years, he said. "He used some of it to pay for the bulldozers to tear down your neighborhood." The crowd let out gasps of shock. "This man is a thief." Several people shouted, "Are you trying to arrest me?" Montgomery demanded, "I'm a billionaire. You're making a huge mistake." The next day, Montgomery was hauled out of his office in handcuffs. He didn't seem to understand what was happening. "What is this all about?" Wes watched from across the street, smiling softly. "This is about you stealing from his own company for 30 years. Montgomery's face twisted in rage. "This man is delusional." Montgomery turned to face the crowd of stunned neighbors. "You always were one of my favorite customers." "I am a gutter man," Wes said quietly. "And I've seen far more than you know." The end.